He didn't cry when he buried his mother. He didn't cry when his business nearly collapsed. He didn't even cry the night his house burned down and he lost everything he owned in a single hour. But the night a 67-year-old man handed him a folded piece of paper across a diner table in Memphis, Tennessee, that was the night Raymond Cole finally broke. He sat in that booth, rain hitting the window beside him, and he wept so hard he couldn't breathe. Not because he had lost something, but because he suddenly wasn't sure if anything he had ever believed about his life was real. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching this from. We genuinely love hearing from our community. And if you are new here, please click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now let's go back to where this all truly began. Raymond Cole was not born into comfort. He grew up in a small house in East Memphis, the kind of neighborhood where front porches sagged under the weight of years and nobody locked their doors because there was nothing valuable enough to steal. His father, Gerald Cole, worked double shifts at a distribution warehouse just to keep the lights on. His mother, Patricia, stretched every dollar so far it was almost transparent. Raymond shared a bedroom with his younger brother, Darnell, and they slept on mattresses so thin they could feel the springs. But none of that ever felt like poverty to Raymond, because his parents made that small house feel full. Full of laughter, of arguing over the television remote, of the smell of his mother's cornbread on Sunday mornings, and of a kind of stubborn love that didn't ask for anything in return. Raymond was sharp. The kind of quiet, observant student that teachers noticed but never quite knew how to classify. He didn't raise his hand often. But when he did, the answer was always right. He earned a partial scholarship to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville and paid the rest through night shifts at a loading dock and weekend work at a car wash. He studied business management and he was relentless about it, not because he dreamed of being wealthy, but because he had watched his father come home every night with sore knees and calloused hands, and he had made himself a private promise that nobody else in his family would ever have to live like that again. That promise became the engine of everything Raymond Cole would eventually build. By his late 20s, Raymond had started a regional freight and logistics company out of a rented office space barely larger than a studio apartment. He had 2 employees, 1 company truck, and a business line on a prepaid phone. 3 years later, he had 40 employees and a fleet of 16 vehicles. By the time he turned 40, Cole Logistics had contracts with 5 major retailers across 4 states. The man who once ate $1 ramen for dinner was now on the cover of a Tennessee business magazine under the headline, "The Quiet Giant of Memphis Commerce." But Raymond never changed the way he talked to people. He never forgot where he came from. And that fact alone made people want to be loyal to him. He met his wife, Diane, when he was 31 years old, at a charity fundraiser hosted by one of his early clients. She was poised, graceful, and she laughed in a way that made the whole room feel warmer. Raymond was not a man who fell quickly. He was careful, observant, and slow to trust. But something about Diane made all of that caution simply dissolve. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. They married in a simple outdoor ceremony in Shelby County with 200 guests and a reception that ended at midnight because Raymond had an early morning meeting and Diane had already planned the next 5 years of their life in a notebook she kept on her nightstand. She was organized. She was driven. And Raymond loved her with the particular intensity of a man who had never expected to be loved back so completely. Their daughter, Cassidy, was born in the 3rd year of their marriage. Raymond was in the delivery room and he held her 17 minutes after she entered the world, and that was the moment, he would later say, that he understood what the word enough really meant. Not enough money. Not enough success. Just enough. Right there in that room. He became the kind of father that neighborhoods talk about. The one coaching soccer on Saturday mornings even when he had a conference call at noon. The one who drove 2 hours in the middle of the night when Cassidy called from a college party and felt uncomfortable and didn't want to ask but didn't know who else to call. Raymond Cole loved that girl the way only a man who had been humbled by life can love something. Without conditions. Without performance. Without end. And for 22 years, that was his world. His company. His wife. His daughter. 3 things he had built and protected and poured himself into without reservation. Which is exactly why what happened next nearly destroyed him. It began with a phone call Raymond almost didn't answer. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early March, and Raymond was reviewing quarterly contracts at his office. His personal cell phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, a Memphis area code he couldn't place. He almost let it go to voicemail. Something made him pick it up. The voice on the other end was an older man, slightly breathless, cautious in the way people are when they know they are about to say something that cannot be unsaid. "Mr. Cole." "Raymond Cole." The man said. "My name is Walter Briggs. I don't expect you to know me. But I need to meet with you in person. It's important. It's about your family." Raymond assumed it was a scam. He asked the man to explain himself over the phone. Walter refused. He said only this: "I have been waiting 22 years to make this call. I think you deserve to know the truth while you still have time to do something with it." Raymond agreed to meet him 3 days later. He told no one, not Diane, not his business partner, not even his brother Darnell. He drove himself to a quiet diner on Poplar Avenue on a Thursday evening, and he sat across from a 67-year-old man with tired eyes and a manila envelope on the table between them. Walter Briggs had spent most of his adult life working as a hospital administrator in Memphis. He was retired now. His wife had passed 2 years prior. He had no children of his own. And for 22 years, he said, he had carried a secret that had been eating at him from the inside like rust on iron. He looked at Raymond and said simply, "I owe you this. I should have come sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." Think about that for a moment. 22 years. 22 years of school plays and birthday cakes and late-night fevers and college applications and every single ordinary Tuesday that added up to a life Raymond believed was completely his. And somewhere in that whole span of time, there was a man sitting on a truth that would have changed everything. How do you even begin to absorb something like that? How would you feel if you were sitting across that table? Inside the envelope was a collection of documents. Hospital records. A letter. And 2 photographs. Raymond looked at the photographs first. One was of a man he had never seen before. The other was of Cassidy, taken when she was about 12 years old. He looked between the 2 photographs and he felt something shift in his chest, a slow, terrible tilting, like a ship that had just taken on too much water. The resemblance was quiet but undeniable. The same jaw. The same angle of the eyes. The same slight asymmetry in the smile that Raymond had always assumed Cassidy got from Diane's side of the family. Walter explained everything slowly, carefully, watching Raymond's face as he did. Before Raymond and Diane had married, the 2 of them had gone through a difficult stretch. A 6-week separation, the kind that couples downplay to themselves as just a rough patch, just a little space, just time to breathe. Raymond knew about the separation. He remembered it. What he did not know, what he had never been told, was that during those 6 weeks, Diane had briefly been involved with another man. A colleague. A man named Stephen. And when Diane discovered she was pregnant 3 months after reconciling with Raymond, she had reason to believe, a real and documented reason, that Raymond might not be the biological father. She had said nothing. She had calculated the timing carefully in her own mind, convinced herself of the version of the story she could live with, and she had moved forward. Walter had been a friend of Stephen's at the time. He had known. And he had stayed quiet out of loyalty, out of cowardice, out of a belief that silence was the kindest option. He no longer believed that. Raymond sat in that diner booth for 40 minutes without saying a single word after Walter finished talking. The waitress refilled his coffee twice. He didn't touch it either time. He just sat there, looking at the table, while 22 years rearranged themselves inside his mind into a shape he didn't recognize. He drove home that night and he walked into his house and Diane was in the kitchen making dinner and Cassidy had called earlier about coming home for the weekend, and the house smelled like garlic and rosemary and everything was completely ordinary. And Raymond stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and looked at his wife of 22 years and he felt, for the first time in their entire marriage, like a stranger in his own life. He said nothing that night. He said nothing for 3 days. He quietly arranged a private DNA test through a physician he trusted. He provided a sample. He recovered one of Cassidy's hairbrushes from her old bedroom. He waited. And on a Friday morning, sitting alone in his office with the door closed and his phone face down on the desk, he read the results. The probability of paternity was less than 0.01%. Raymond Cole was not Cassidy's biological father. He closed his laptop. He stood up. He walked to his office window and he looked out over the Memphis skyline that his company had helped build, and he stood there for a very long time. And then, quietly, without drama, he sat back down and he cried. Not the sharp, angry kind of crying that comes from rage. But the deep, heaving kind that comes from grief. The kind that surprises you. The kind that means something inside you has finally understood something your mind was not ready to accept. What would you do at that moment? Seriously, ask yourself that. If you were Raymond, sitting in that chair, holding those results, with 22 years behind you and your whole family just down the road, what would your next move be? Raymond's next move was one of the most controlled and painful things he had ever done in his life. He waited 2 more weeks. He spoke to a therapist, a man he had seen briefly years earlier after his father died, and he worked through enough of the initial devastation to be able to think clearly. Then he sat Diane down in the living room on a Saturday morning after breakfast, and he placed the DNA results on the coffee table between them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't use a single word he would later regret. He simply looked at her and said, "I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. Right now." What followed was one of the most painful conversations 2 people can have. Diane did not deny it. She had known, or strongly suspected, from the time Cassidy was born. She had convinced herself over the years that it didn't matter, that Raymond was Cassidy's father in every way that counted, that the biological question was secondary to the love and the life they had built. She had buried the uncertainty so deeply that she had almost stopped believing it herself. She cried. She apologized. She said she had been terrified of losing him. She said she had been 28 years old and pregnant and afraid, and that fear had made her choose the version of reality she could survive. She said she was sorry. Over and over again. She said she was sorry. And Raymond listened to all of it. He listened because he is the kind of man who listens before he speaks. And when she finished, he said only, "You didn't give me the choice to decide for myself. That's what I can't forgive right now." He did not scream. He did not throw anything. He stood up, walked to his car, and drove for 3 hours across Tennessee backroads with no destination in mind and the radio off. Because some pain doesn't have a soundtrack. Some pain is just silence and speed and the white lines on the road. 6 months passed before Raymond told Cassidy. Those 6 months were a slow-motion unraveling of his marriage, conducted quietly and without spectacle, because neither Raymond nor Diane wanted their daughter to find out the wrong way. They separated. Raymond moved into an apartment near his office. They told people it was a rough patch. Only Darnell knew anything close to the truth, and only because Raymond needed someone to talk to on the nights when the walls of that apartment felt like they were pressing in. Darnell listened and he didn't say much, the way a good brother does. He just made sure Raymond ate. Just made sure he wasn't alone too often. Sometimes that's the whole job. Raymond flew to Nashville, where Cassidy was now working as a graphic designer, on a Sunday in October. He took her to lunch at a quiet restaurant she loved. And over 2 hours and 2 cups of coffee, he told her everything. Every part of it. Gently, carefully, with as much steadiness as he could manage. Cassidy went through what anyone would go through. First disbelief. Then a kind of stunned, suspended silence. Then tears. Then anger, some of it directed at her mother, some of it directed at the situation itself, and a small, frightened portion of it directed at Raymond, as if she was afraid of what his knowing might mean for them. She reached across the table and grabbed his hand and said, "Dad, are you going to be different with me now? Are you going to look at me differently?" And Raymond looked at his daughter, this woman he had raised from a tiny, squinting infant into a capable, creative, extraordinary human being, and he said, "Cassidy, I have loved you every single day of your life. I was there when you took your first step. I was there when you cried in the parking lot after your first heartbreak. I drove through a snowstorm to bring you soup when you had pneumonia your freshman year of college. None of that has a single thing to do with biology. You are my daughter. Full stop. End of conversation." She cried. He cried. The couple at the table next to them politely looked away and probably cried a little too, because some moments are simply too human not to feel. Now, this is the part of the story where most people might expect a villain. And yes, there was deception. Yes, there was a choice made in fear that caused immeasurable pain. But Raymond was careful not to reduce the story of his entire life down to one terrible decision made by a frightened 28-year-old woman. He said later, in a private conversation with his therapist that his brother shared with permission, "Diane made a choice I will never fully understand. But she also gave 22 years of her life to our family. Those two things are both true at the same time. And I have to be big enough to hold both." That sentence alone tells you everything you need to know about the character of Raymond Cole. The divorce was finalized 14 months after that Saturday morning conversation. It was not hostile. It was sad, the way the end of something real is always sad, not bitter, just quiet and final and full of a grief that doesn't quite fit into legal language. Raymond and Diane agreed on terms that were fair. They agreed that both of them would remain in Cassidy's life without using her as a messenger or a battleground. They agreed that the past would not be weaponized against anyone, including themselves. It was the most civilized unraveling of a marriage that most people in their circle had ever witnessed. And that restraint came entirely from Raymond, who understood that how you end something says just as much about your character as how you begin it. Raymond eventually reached out, through a mutual contact, to the man named Stephen. It was not a confrontation. Stephen had no idea, all those years, that Cassidy might be his biological daughter. He had moved on with his life, remarried, had 2 other children, and lived in Atlanta. The revelation hit him like a wall. He responded to Raymond's message with a single sentence, "I don't know what to say except I'm sorry you carried this." Raymond appreciated that. He did not ask Stephen to play any role in Cassidy's life. He left that entirely up to Cassidy, who was now 23 years old and old enough to make that decision for herself. Cassidy is still deciding. She has exchanged a few emails with Stephen. She says it feels strange and abstract, like reading a book about someone else's family and being told you're in it. She is not angry at Raymond. She is not angry at her mother, at least not anymore. She said in a conversation with her cousin that was later shared with Raymond, "I spent a month being furious at everyone. And then I realized that being furious wasn't going to give me back a single moment of the life I already had. And that life was good. That life was full. My dad made sure of that." Raymond wept when he heard she had said that. The good kind of crying this time. Raymond Cole still runs his company. He still shows up at 7 in the morning. He still calls Cassidy every Sunday evening. He still drives past the house where he grew up sometimes, on nights when he needs to remember where he started, and he sits outside it for a few minutes and thinks about his mother and her cornbread and the way she used to say that real love doesn't count the cost. He thinks she was right. He remarried 3 years after the divorce. A woman named Gloria, a high school principal with 2 grown sons and a laugh that sounds like it means what it says. Raymond says she is the quietest miracle of his life. He says falling in love again at 51 felt like finding a door in a wall he thought was solid. He walked through it anyway. And Cassidy was the one who walked him down the aisle. Think about that. After everything. After the DNA test and the diner booth and the 3-hour drive and the 14 months of legal paperwork and the grief that doesn't have a soundtrack. After all of it. His daughter walked him down the aisle at his second wedding, and she was smiling, and he was smiling, and in that one image is everything this story was ever really about. Because here is what Raymond Cole knows now that he didn't fully understand before all of this happened. Family is not a biological fact. It is a daily choice. It is the Tuesday evening phone calls when nothing specific is wrong and you just wanted to hear the other person's voice. It is the way you show up when things fall apart. It is the 22 years of ordinary mornings that add up to something so large and so real that no piece of paper can define it or take it away. Blood tells you where someone came from. Love tells you where they belong. And the man who built an empire? He will tell you, if you ask him on a good day, that the most important thing he ever built had nothing to do with freight contracts or company trucks or magazine covers. It was a relationship with a girl who calls him every Sunday. Who named him first in her phone contacts. Who will look back on her childhood someday and remember that her father never, not once, made her feel like anything less than his whole world. That's the empire that matters. That's the one that lasts. Now we want to hear from you, because this story raises some of the hardest questions any of us will ever think about. Could you have stayed, the way Raymond stayed? Could you have kept loving a child after a revelation like that? And what about the choice Diane made out of fear, made by a young woman who was terrified of losing everything? Can fear be an explanation without being an excuse? We genuinely want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Don't hold back. Real conversations happen in this community, and your perspective matters. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who have loved you quietly and consistently without ever asking for recognition, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the next story we are telling is one that will stay with you for a very long time. We promise you that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And remember, the people who show up for you every single day, they are your real family. Never take that lightly.